Thank you everyone for being here in both worlds, which is still strange. This is the first time that I've ever talked to actual people in 2 years, so that's exciting. So today I'm presenting a work that I've done with my colleague, which is also conveniently my best friend, and from the University of Pisa, but I will be the only one presenting today because she's in Italy and couldn't come. So if you're interested in this talk or remotely in anything that I say, let me do a bit of a press tour by saying that we just published an edited volume, well, an edited section of the Italian Review for Applied Linguistics, where you can find our paper and many others. And if you're interested in this paper that I'm giving today, it's still in press, but I'm happy to send you the PDF. So I will be very brief because I'm sure that you are all very knowledgeable about this stuff. But the framework that we use to analyze metaphors in coronavirus journalistic discourse is, of course, conceptual metaphor theory, so Lakoff and Johnson, very famous book, which see metaphors not just as a linguistic element, but more as a cognitive phenomenon. Because what Lakoff said is that our conceptual system is mainly metaphorical in nature. Metaphors have three elements to them, mainly. So a source domain, which is the domain from which the metaphorical image originates from. So love is a journey would be the source domain. Target domain, which is what the metaphor conceptualizes, so in this case, love. And then a mapping of correspondences between the two. Metaphor theory is being used widely in the literature to analyze societal and general issues. And very conveniently, as Michela was saying, corpus approaches of metaphor are particularly useful when you try to explain a problem or an issue in society and how it is framed, especially in the media. So what I'm going to be talking about today is clearly a health and a socioeconomic crisis. And if you look at the literature, these themes have been widely approached, and a series of metaphors, conventional metaphors, have been found to be relevant in these fields. We decided to focus on metaphors in coronavirus because, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, a group of scholars, which then most of them collated in the Reframe COVID project at Lancaster University, were started to be interested in how the pandemic was represented metaphorically in both social media, so by the common user, and in media language, so journals and online magazines, etc. And it's really interesting to analyze the language of online press or the media in general, because in the media, metaphors often are used to popularize and condense complex issues, so they make them digestible for the reader. But also, it's interesting because if you use a metaphorical image, you have a source domain and a target domain, and this could somehow hinder some aspects that do not fit with the mappings of the metaphorical representation. So it's interesting to see what aspects are highlighted and what aspects are instead downgraded. There we go. So in order to understand our work, a very brief word of how Italy responded to the pandemic. Not well would be an answer, but so as you know, Italy was the first country in Europe to be hit by the pandemic in early 2020, and the first lockdown measures actually were in February 2020, local lockdown measures in Lombardy near Milan. And the Italian government had individuated two phases, because they were being very optimistic, of how we would respond to the pandemic. So the first phase, which goes from the end of February to the end of April, is what was called phase 1. And that was like the complete lockdown, either local or then national on March 9th. But this is where, you know, we weren't allowed to leave our houses, etc., etc. Starting from the end of April, instead, there was a gradual reopening of the country. So the official beginning of phase 2, which was the gradual reopening of everything, is officially May 4th. But some regions which had lower numbers than others were actually allowed to reopen a bit earlier than that. So we make phase 2 start from approximately April 27th, April 28th, and until June 3rd, which was the day in which the national borders were partially reopened to everyone, basically. So, coming to our research questions. These are very broad, and I do not intend to answer them fully, clearly, but we mainly asked ourselves, what are the major themes that the press discusses in this period of time that I just highlighted? Do these themes change from phase 1 to phase 2? And if yes, when and how? And can we then identify networks of metaphorical image, of figurative language, that pertains to the identified themes? So, as data, we collected a corpus, because that's what we do, basically from February 24th to June the 2nd, which was the last day of phase 2. And we did that with Google searches and the bootcat tool, which is a web scraping tool. And we did that with complex searches of keywords. And then we manually refined the corpus. So the corpus is not that big, it's less than 500,000 words. But we made sure that we included only some textual types that we were interested in, so longer articles. Because if we're interested in metaphors, daily bulletins saying these many people died and these many people got ill are not useful. And in the end, we have a little bit over 500 articles. These are the data sources. So we have both local newspaper and magazine and national newspaper and magazine, because we were interested in both levels. So the fine grade local news, talking about more localized issues, and the more global, local, national news kind of thing. The first thing that we did was, so we combined quantitative and qualitative analysis in this work. And to investigate themes, we ran a topic modeling analysis. So topic modeling, again, I'm going to go very fast, but you can ask questions if you're interested, is a Bayesian probabilistic algorithm of text mining that clusters co-occurring words across documents and hence gives you what is supposed to be a topic, so a theme that is supposed to be talked about in that document. It's a bit like collocation, but more difficult. And there are a lot of text mining algorithm out there, and we chose STM because it's really interesting. It allows you to model the data according to external covariates. So in our case, the covariates that we chose are temporal covariates, so phase, so we wanted to see phase 1 versus phase 2, but also week. So the journal articles that we collected span across 14 weeks, so we wanted to see like if there was a smooth change across these weeks. In topic modeling, the researcher has a very active role, so it's not one of those algorithms that you click a button or you run a code and it just spits the output out. So you have to choose how many topics you want the model to retrieve. And of course we did it combining qualitative and quantitative assessment, but in the end, the ideal model for mathematical fit and for interpretability of the topics was 3. And these are the topics that the model retrieved. So of course it's in Italian, but it's pretty easy to understand. The first topic has words, most probable words like virus, cases, patients, doctors. So we labeled it the topic of health. The second topic has social work, crisis, politics, home, etc. So we labeled it as society. And topic 3 has crisis, businesses, work, jobs, economy. So we labeled it as economy. So these are the 3 main themes that emerge from the newspaper. Not surprisingly, because it's a pandemic, so we talk about health, we talk about the social impact and the economic impact. We then run the statistical analysis to see how these models changed from phase 1 to phase 2. And we actually found a very interesting thing, which is a significant change of topic between the 2 phases. So if you can see, like, the plots have phase 1 versus phases 2 and vice versa. And in the first part of the emergency, newspaper or magazines were much more concerned with the health crisis. So they were talking about health a lot and much less so about society and economy. Whereas when the reopening starts, so when the numbers started to go down because we had been in lockdown for 3 months, societal and economical issues became suddenly more present than the health crisis, which we thought was subsiding, but yeah. So When we analyze it per week instead, we find that there is a significant decrease for the topic of health and a significant increase for the topic of economy around week 8, so which is the one that I circled in red. And this is where, I mean, it's a complicated situation, but this is the most, this is the focus where we see a prevalence of socioeconomic topics getting the ground more than health issues. And April 13 to 19th is around 10 days between the beginning of phase 2. So we see that even before the government had actually released everyone out or started the gradual reopening of the country, the press was already pressing for the socioeconomic crisis and what businesses are going to do, or I don't know. So it's interesting because we see, of course, like phase 2 was discussed in public opinion, but we see how the press was already starting to feed these themes into the public opinion while we were very much still in lockdown and in phase 1. After we identified these themes, we wanted to analyze the metaphors in them. And as you are all aware, because you lived through it, metaphors of coronavirus are very, very important in how the press publicizes and talks about the crisis. So the first one, it said, so the image says, will there be a second wave? And I don't need to tell you how that image is metaphorical in nature. And then we have the very, very famous image. I don't know if it was as popular to reach the UK, but in Italy, the image of the doctor holding the country in red was everywhere for months on end. And then we have the very much discussed topic, metaphor of the virus as a war. So in this case, virus as a bomb, I guess. We wanted to see if there were metaphors that we could identify within the topic that we found. So since Michaela talked about how important is method, I'm going to talk to you about method. We performed concordance and collocational queries on Sketch Engine by looking at keywords of the 3 topics. So virus, economy, and society. And then we proceed to do a concordance analysis and see if we could identify some metaphorical images in there. And if we found something, we would then check it against MetaNet, which is an online repository of conventional metaphors, which is also based on conceptual metaphor theory. And then we kind of worked from there inductively. So if we found the metaphor, we then would try to perform other queries using the metaphors as an input. So for example, if we found war, we then would use war as a keyword and look for other metaphorical images associated to that. Once we were happy with the metaphors that we found and the main themes, we then decided to not analyze the metaphor virus is a war, because it's already very talked about in literature. There are already many, many works that talk about virus as a war, the pandemic as combat, etc., etc. So we chose to just analyze other metaphors that came out as relevant, but not as relevant as virus as a war. So these are, in short, the domain-specific metaphors that we found. So for the topic of health, so topic 1, it's interesting that we find that health is both conceptualized as a source domain and as a target domain. So we have metaphors like health crises are natural disasters. So health is pretty much the target domain, but also a source domain. So economy and society are patients. So health is actually the source domain where the metaphor is taken from. And for economy and society, we put them together because we saw that the metaphors were pretty much the same for both of them. Socioeconomic crises are natural disasters, economy and society are buildings, machines, or, as I said, patients. Another interesting finding that we saw is that one thing that the press did, which was really clever, I don't know if that was conscious or not, but it's really interesting, that they used the same metaphor, but with different meaning. So, for example, the metaphor of a tsunami, so natural disaster, was used both to understand the contagion, so how the disease was spreading and how it was overwhelming hospitals all around Italy and then around Europe and around the world. But also, when we transition to phase 2, the metaphor is very much present in the reader's mind. So journalists reuse it because it's convenient, because it's already activated in our conceptual system. So now the socioeconomic crisis is a tsunami, right? So after the health crisis comes another tsunami, which is the economic crisis. So this is the metaphorical network that we reconstructed from that. And crisis as natural forces is, of course, already present in the literature, especially in Cardini 2014. And then we wanted to see what economy and society were represented as in the literature, well, in the literature, in the corpus. And we find interesting recurring patterns for verbs, especially. So we find verbs such as rebuild, submerge, structure, to base, to take off, to push, hibernate, generate, to give birth to. This is, of course, a word sketch analysis. So this is a collocation analysis done visually in Sketch Engine. And so you can see that these verbs in yellow and red both pertain to two different metaphors. So we have economy and society as structural objects, in which these two, well, the two topics, economy and society, are represented as buildings or machines, vehicles. And this is a metaphor that has already been found in how socioeconomic crisis, especially the 2008 crisis, is represented in the literature. So this was very present in the press after the Wall Street crisis in 2008. And then also economy and society as living organism, which of course, as a sub-metaphor, has economy and society as patients, right? Because if you're a living being, then you can be sick, and then you're a patient. What was interesting here is that sometimes it was not very widespread, so I wouldn't say that it was a trend, but we found it. So in some cases, the metaphor of health, so economy and society are patients, and the elements that are taken from the source domain are the symptoms of coronavirus. So journalists would use symptoms, which again were very present in the reader's mind because everyone knew what COVID looked like by then, as a metaphor for economy. So for example, the economy and society needs to be put in intensive care until we're out of this crisis and we can start again, basically. Or there was like a coma or hibernated. I think I remember, but I would need to check the data, that there was something about like breathing, so the economy is not breathing. So all of these symptoms, physical symptoms that the readers, again, were very familiar with, were used to make the article more accessible and also more poignant to the audience, basically. And so to conclude very briefly and to answer our research question, again, not in fully because this is last year, so it would be interesting to do a follow-up study with what happens this year. What are the major themes discussed by the press? We performed a structural topic modeling analysis, and we found that it was health, society, and economy. Not really surprising. The themes in the press do change from phase 1 to phase 2. So we see that the press becomes more interested in economy and society in phase 2, whereas in phase 1 it was pretty much discussing health-centered issues. And this shift happens, weirdly enough, not around phase 2, which was, I personally expected it to happen, but 10 days before, 10 to 15 days, depends. And can we identify networks of topic-related metaphors? Yes, we could. Health is both source domain and target domain, and then we have the reuse of the same source domain to indicate different target domains, and economy and society are both living organism and structured objects, and have this like dual nature of being both a patient and a machine that needs to be restarted. So to conclude, I think that combining topic modeling with a fine-grained qualitative corpus analysis, with in this case was concordance analysis to find metaphors, but in other cases could be other things, could be a viable method to investigate rhetorical strategies and to really understand how we frame complex events. In this case, using figurative language, but in other cases, qualitative corpus linguistics or discourse analysis can be very handy. And that's us the day that we discussed our Viva, so we're very happy.
Oh. Thank you. I love those floral headpieces you're wearing.
Yeah, it's a tradition in Italy when you graduate to have like a laurel crown, but we wanted to be fancy, so we bought floral ones.
Oh, can you get me one of them? It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Lucia. That was very interesting. I'm actually going to go straight to Zoom because I think we have a question waiting from Dario. Is that right, Dario? You have your hand up? No. Okay. That's fine. Can you? Yes. Yes. Fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, because my computer is not working properly today. So anyway, thank you very much for the talk. And I was wondering, like, I really like the way you mixed the topic modeling, algorithm. And my idea is like that this is the best way now to integrate like metaphor analysis, like the qualitative like approaches to metaphorical analysis. But anyway, let's go to the question. Sorry. What about the? Do you think that there should be kind of an historical study on this topic? Like, do you think that there are like historical triggers? For example, so society and economy is something that and health are topics which are strongly like important now because COVID, one of the most problematic aspects of COVID is the fact that the economy is like going down now. So, and so my very confused reflection, because you told a lot of things, but would you be interested in doing an historical, in applying this methodology to an old asset, like for example, relation to Spanish flu or another kind of pandemics?
Well, yes, absolutely. For the main problem that I can see with that is how to get the data. So you can perform this kind of analysis on many kind of textual data, but if we're looking at the press describing the pandemic as it happens, of course, access to press articles from 1918 would be much more difficult than just Googling keywords or having a software doing a web scrape for you. But yeah, absolutely, it would be extremely interesting to see how different crises throughout history have been conceptualized by the press. And we find that many of these metaphors are conventional metaphors that have been reused over and over again. So we did not find a crisis that was both health and societal in nature together. But if you look at the literature of health crisis, so for example, the very famous book by Susan Sontag about the AIDS pandemic, or all the work that has been done around Ebola a few years ago. And a lot of work has been done around the 2008 crisis. And you see these metaphors coming up over and over again. So there is something there, but yeah. If you have access to 1918 press, please do send it over.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
More time. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you. Thanks for your question, Dario. Let's take a question from the room, if there is one. Yes?
Did you find any difference in newspapers across the political spectrum in the way that they dealt with the metaphor?
That would be we didn't look for it because we were interested in both local and national newspapers. So we didn't look specifically for newspapers that had allegiance to a political party or a political area. But my idea is that yes, there is, but I do not have the data to support it. So it would be very interesting to do a more detailed data collection, looking specifically for articles from several newspapers, from one part or the other, and see how they differ. But we didn't do it. But yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, we have a question on Slido from, apologies if I pronounced this incorrectly, Domagoj. Are you there to ask your question? Otherwise, I'm happy to pick one on your behalf.
Yes, I'm here. This is Domagoj.
Oh, Domagoj, thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, so, yes, feel free to ask one of the questions you posted here.
Very interesting. I'm also dealing with conceptual metaphors, so I'm sorry for my English, it's quite rusty. But two questions. Have you found any new conceptual sub-metaphors or conceptual metaphors in a corpus which are not found in literature, especially those connected with COVID-19 virus, coronavirus as a target domain?
Yes, so we used MetaNet as a reference. So if we found a metaphor on MetaNet, we consider it to be conventional because it's documented. So yes, it exists. But actually, so let me go back. Yes, I didn't explain it because I didn't have time, but so thank you very much for your question. The blue square is what we didn't find in MetaNet. So if something is labeled as blue, it means that this is our interpretation of what the metaphor could be represented as, but we didn't find it. So it's not conventional, is new. And as you can see, economic prosperity is physical health, which is a sub-mapping of economy as a patient, is not present, weirdly enough, because it kind of follows from economy as a patient. So if you're prosper, you are in physical health. But it was not present in the literature. So yeah, I think that this is new in the case of this crisis at the moment.
Okay, do you think it's a conceptual metaphor? Because many researchers such as Alice Degnan think that you have to have a lot of data in order to name something conceptual metaphor.
Yeah, I agree. So we do not go into the theoretical definition of what is a conceptual metaphor and what is not. We simply, this is a very much data-driven work. So what we found and what we found as new, we tried to give it a name, provisional, might be wrong. And this could be found in other data, this could not be found in other data, but additional research is needed to actually say this is a conceptual metaphor, or this is just a sub-mapping that was present here but maybe not in other places.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions, Domagoj, and thank you again for your presentation, Lucia. Thank you.